This program funded in part by Nebraskans for Public Television. Warning, this program contains graphic pictures of Nazi concentration camps and viewer discretion is advised. Through Auschwitz to Omaha, Carl Rosenberg remembers. With the end of World War II, 40 years ago, the history books closed on a dark chapter, and our eyes were opened to such atrocities against humanity never before imagined by mankind. Simple freedoms we take for granted were not possible for so many. Millions perished, few survived. This is the story of that chapter in history through the eyes of one man who does remember. Carl's tailor and clothier shop moved to this location in 1968 and, as you can see, shares the building with a sailboat dealer. The shop is owned by Carl Rosenberg and his wife Rachel, both survivors of the Holocaust. The Rosenbergs are Polish Jews who managed to escape the Warsaw Ghetto, but who spent World War II in concentration camps. Carl, through his talents and wits, amazingly survived through both Auschwitz and Dachau, two of the largest and deadliest extermination centers set up by the Nazis. 40 years ago, Carl Rosenberg was liberated from Nazi persecution. With his freedom, Carl had a chance for life, a new life that brought him here to Omaha in 1949. Carl's story is one of survival and one of success. Success in America. Carl's story begins in Poland in 1939. Carl was a 22-year-old soldier fighting in Warsaw in the Polish Army's brief struggle against the German war machine. Germany launched its assault September 1st, and 18 days later, Poland surrendered. With Hitler in power, the Nazis began a progressive terror against the Jews in Poland. The systematic withdrawal of Jewish rights began, and anti-Semitism flourished. In some villages, all the male Jews were shot after being forced to dig their own graves. Orthodox Jews in holy dress, their beards and locks of hair sacred, were humiliated and beaten on the streets of Warsaw. In our studios at UNO and in his tailor shop, Carl talked to us about his life and life for Jews in Hitler's Poland.
They did come out with a law which was publicly announced that the Jewish people could not have opened their synagogues for daily prayers or any prayers, and they closed every Jewish school at once. On the streets, the Jewish been very much limited, and of course they was recognized on their look, and most of them there was that the Jewish Orthodox Hasidic Jews been very much penalized when the German soldiers cut their birds with scissors on the street.
The largest concentration of Eastern European Jews, over 3 million, lived in Poland when Hitler's army invaded in 1939, numbers that would soon diminish. The Nazis immediately set about cleaning up the Jewish problem, a temporary measure toward a final solution. Jews were resettled and grouped together for better control. The marking with a Jewish star, restriction on movement, confiscation of property, and forced labor were completed within the first few months of German occupation. Then came the ghettos. The large Jewish populations in the cities like Lodz and Warsaw were entirely concentrated in slums. Jewish movement and existence totally under German control. Eventually, these ghettos were walled in and the Jews cut off from the rest of the world. Karl was working as a tailor in Warsaw, sewing German officers' uniforms, when a piece of life-saving advice was passed on to him.
In 1939, December time, to reach January, the month of January 1940, the Germans have already started to build a ghetto in Warsaw. At the time, I worked as a tailor with one of my friends, and we have a customer there, which we've been making him suits. He was a Gestapo officer at the time. He was already a lieutenant. He revealed to me a secret in 1940 in March. He said to me, I like you, and what I'm telling you is a secret word. Get out before the closing the ghetto, because the ghetto is built, which will be a Jewish death trap, and nobody would survive the ghetto. I put on a cross on my chest, dressed up as all the Christians, and walked away from the ghetto to reach the destiny of Wolanov, the birth of my mother's home.
Karl, through his quick wits, escaped the Germans in Warsaw, but ended up in 1942 in a labor camp near Wallano, where he was born. There he volunteered his services as a tailor. Karl remembers Otto Bussi, the commandant of the camp, as sympathetic to the plight of his prisoners.
He says, I shall not be afraid of him. He will never hurt me. He said to me in a secret words, in a very quiet way, in his office, that I am a Christian. I am not a Nazi, and I will never hurt you people. We've been very lucky, and I still appreciate today. Under the supervision of Otto Bussi, we did not have any difficulties, and we didn't have any casualties. When the time the German counterparts in the offices which have been in charge have complained against him that he is a Jewish lover. And so they moved away Bussi as in charge of the base construction, and he sent in a man with the name Hermann Ruby. Under Hermann Ruby's ruling, at once, when he took over, he ordered to be 130 people, men, women, and youngsters, were shot to death.
Executions soon became a daily occurrence. Karl found Otto Bussi to be an exception as conditions worsened under the new commandant, Hermann Ruby. Only the strongest would survive the disease, starvation, and working conditions. In 1943, most of Karl's family was incarcerated in the Wallano camp. Karl remembers his young cousin Bluma, a fragile 14-year-old forced to exist under horrid conditions. During the severe winter of 1943, Bluma was ordered to stand barefooted in the snow in sub-zero temperatures for one of the work details. When the younger girl refused to obey, her execution was ordered. Karl, himself sick with typhus, managed to save her.
They arrested Bluma. And Bluma will be die by shooting there. Maybe 2 hours from now, she will be dead. I went to the commandant. When I knocked at his door, and I got in, not waiting to answer for me to get in, but I got in. He looked at me and said, "What are you doing over here? Aren't you sick on a typhus?" I said, "Look, I came to you, I want your key from the sheikh." Well, he got up and he started to scream. He said he's crazy. He called in 4 policemen from there to say, "Look, take him back there, he's crazy."
They could have killed you for that, though, right?
They could not only kill me, they could take me apart there. But I ordered that policeman not to touch me. And I said to the commandant immediately, "If you're not going to give me the key, you will be tomorrow buried in that open grave right afterwards where that people will be buried."
So you actually threatened him?
I threatened him and I scared him to death. I got Bluma out, not only risking my life. If they would find out at the time, if Berkman would find out that I did behind his back such a thing, that mean he would kill, that time he would kill all of us. At the time, I still have living my mother, my father, myself, a sister, and 2 brothers. I risked the life as well of them I did as mine.
Bluma did survive the war. Karl's bravery was displayed more than once during his imprisonment. In another example, Karl was able to bribe officers into keeping the Wallenow camp open. Because of a typhus outbreak, medical officers had ordered the camp closed and all the prisoners killed. Karl secured a few valuables from other prisoners and bribed Ruby into arranging to keep the camp operating. Karl reminded the commandant, should Wallenow close its gates, the officers would most likely be sent to fight on the Russian front. Keeping the camp open was only temporary, though. By 1941, Hitler had ordered the final solution for the Jewish question. The German hierarchy had irrevocably decided to annihilate an entire people. By 1942, the mass extermination of Eastern European Jewry had begun. The death camps, Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Treblinka, Dachau, and others were opened for business. In May 1943, the Russian army began to move against the Germans in eastern Poland. Karl and the other Wallenow prisoners were relocated to Blizen, where there was a labor camp. There, 4,500 prisoners sewed German uniforms for 16 hours a day. 1 year later, in May of 1944, the advancing Russians pushed the Germans back. Then came orders to relocate the prisoners. 1,000 had perished in Blizen the year Karl was there. The Germans, dependent on their slave labor, loaded Karl and other inmates into rail cattle cars. Their destination, Auschwitz.
There was on the floor, space on the floor wise is about 45 men to be packed in there. But he packed us in 100 men. There was no floor space to stand. So we sat in each and other on the floor, piled in between the legs. We've been lucky, very lucky, that the floor was not spread with anything except the wood and the iron bars.
And did you have any food or water in there?
They did not give us any food and any water. We have deaths. When that people died, most of them, in a death transferred, they were weak young people. They died, and we piled them up on the floor from the floor to the ceiling, we received more space to get up and could walk around on the floor.
The SS had posted signs to greet the prisoners upon arrival. The message, "Work will set you free." From the very first, Karl knew Auschwitz was very different from the other camps where he had been.
When we arrived there, the first arrival was early in the morning. It was very quiet. Only what did hit us is the air which came into that little window, to the little window. It was a smelling, burning, stinking, barbecuing smell. We did not know that this is a factory of death by gassing and burning human beings. They lined us up, and then we saw 5 comings sticking out, buildings that did look to us, to me in person, that this is a factory which they are killing cattle in producing meat product.
So you thought it was a meat processing plant?
A meat processing company.
The meat being processed was human flesh. The selection process began from the moment of their arrival. The majority in the transport were sent to die, first gassed, then burned in the huge crematoriums. The record at Auschwitz, 34,000 exterminated in a 24-hour period. The survivors of the first selection, like Karl, were identified with tattoos and used for camp labor. Most died from starvation and disease, some by mutilation in one of the infamous Dr. Mengele's so-called medical experiments. Even though their life was doomed, Karl remembers that the Jews would not give up their faith.
Majority of the people which they went to die, and they been forced, even walking to the gas chambers, knowing that they are dying. They sung songs and saying the words, Shema Yisrael, Ad Hashem Elokeinu, Ad Hashem Echad. They die with the words, with Ani Amin. They were singing, walking into the gas chambers. But the one which, like the one survivors which have witnessed that, they still did not give up the hope, or they did still not rebel against God. They've been going on fighting afterwards, the Germans, as partisans, as workers in the camp, in order with the belief that they will witness the world and tell the story about the Holocaust.
In Auschwitz alone, over 2 million were exterminated. Another 500,000 died from starvation. Somehow, Karl lived through the nightmare and did not give up.
At the time being in all that length of days and nights in concentration camps, I did not lost hope. The hope which a human being can live with is the strongest, whatever in its moment of survival. I watched my other people, and the moment they lost their hope, and they let down the will to continue life, in a short time they perished. I live with it that 90% I know I will die, but the 10% living in me go on with life, don't stop. Possibility could be that I survive.
The Allies were advancing in late 1944 and into 1945. Germany would not admit to losing the war, and Hitler and his advisors continued to blame the Jews for their dilemma. The extermination of a starved and terrorized people increased in record numbers. Those still able to work were kept barely alive. As the Allies moved in, Germans moved prisoners out. In one transport from Auschwitz, Karl was relocated to Dachau. By April 1945, the Allies had control of major German cities, and Berlin was under siege. As the Germans continued to retreat into the Tyrol Mountains, the Dachau prisoners were ordered to leave, so the death march began. 40,000 starving prisoners marched for days, eating only snow for nourishment. Karl remembers the sounds of the artillery nearby, hoping he would live to be rescued. With the Americans pushing at the rear and the Germans in front losing ground, the inmates provided a buffer zone. The sounds of the Allies' approach became louder. Those prisoners still alive were ordered into a barn somewhere along the route to Innsbruck, and unknowingly to them, were abandoned by their guards.
In the morning, early in the morning, we heard, there was about 7 o'clock in the morning, we heard a heavy noise moving to us on the highway. We did start to think, if this is German tanks, we will die. But we delegated or elevated one of us up there. He looked out in that barn between that opening and said, look good, see who's coming. And then he says, a white star on the tank. Come down. We brought him down. He said, it's a white star, that's American. Let's break out from here. Then we got ordered everyone alive to get to that railing doors from the barn, which was blocked by a board. He said, we got to get out from here. So we tried once, 3, 4, 5, we heard a crack. Again, we break out. We've been screaming, yelling. It's no way that I would tell you the moments we start to call, we are free, let's run to the tank.
In May 1945, the Germans surrendered. Karl, weighing only 105 pounds at the time of his liberation, was nursed back to health in hospitals set up by the Americans. He had survived. He had outlived Adolf Hitler, but 6 million Jews had died.
I've been very lucky to survive that. The words which I bring out now, my mother's wish came true in Auschwitz. Speaking to me across the barbed wires, she said, I wish that you, my children, some of you will survive. I did survive. And that was my mother's wish, to carry me farther on with life. The rest of my brothers, two brothers and 2 sisters, mother and father, did not survive. I was the only survivor of the family of the Rosenbergs.
After 6 years of slavery at the age of 29, Karl was a free man. He sought retraining in tailoring at a DP, displaced persons camp, in Munich. There, Karl was reunited with his cousin Bluma and her sister Rachel. Karl and Rachel were married in 1948 and had a son, Maury. The Rosenbergs set about making a new life. They wanted to leave the nightmare of the past behind. Karl did not want to go back to Poland. He felt the Poles blamed the Jews for the war. To relocate to Russia with communism on the upswing seemed unattractive. Karl then decided to move his family to Israel. With the partitioning of Palestine, there was conflict, and Rachel refused to go to Israel. She had had enough fighting and war. The only country that guaranteed them freedom was America. When Truman opened the door to the refugees in 1949, Karl applied for emigration. The Rosenbergs and Bluma, with a sewing machine and a few other possessions, boarded a ship for the United States.
The time when the happy time came, when we got on the ship and came to the United States. And that was the most happiest moment of my life as a survivor to reach the shores of the United States.
Through the services of the United Jewish Appeal, Carl and his family relocated in Omaha, Nebraska. The local Jewish Federation sponsored the family in their first years in the United States. Volunteers with the Omaha chapter of the National Council of Jewish Women helped the family with jobs, housing, and language. One NCJW volunteer, Frances Blumkin, was given the tough assignment of finding Carl his first job.
Wherever she took me, and wherever I got in, I didn't like the place. So I says, Mrs. Blumkin, I'm not going to work here. It's not for me. Well, she said, you are giving me a hard time. How you going to find a job? Finally, they took me to a trailer shop, which the name was Brookstein, 15 Capitol Avenue. And I got the job there. And I worked there. I made my first $35. I was very happy to have $35 of the first payment, the first wages got paid. I worked at Brookstein's, I worked there about 2 months. Then he got slack with time. He said, I don't have enough work for you, so Carl, find yourself a job. I did find a job with the name on 42nd and Leavenworth, Harry Bush, a tailor shop. Harry Bush was a tailor, and a good tailor. He hired me, and I worked for them. Then he says, look, don't work for me. You go for yourself, and don't work for anybody, even Nebraska Clothing Company. Go, Carl, for yourself. Open up a shop. You are too good to waste your time to work for somebody else.
The first year in business was difficult. The Rosenbergs' first break in Omaha came with a job in 1950. During the summer, Carl and Rachel mended clothing for Boys Town. By the end of the summer, they had mended piles upon piles of clothing. Their long hours and hard work paid well.
I complete the work, and I send in a bill, and I got the first $500 to make a down payment on my first home, which I still feel the greatness. And I so much appreciate that the Boys Town helped me to buy my first home.
Carl, nearly 70 now, still works long hours, as does his wife Rachel. Having his own business is a privilege that Carl does not take for granted. America, he says, gave him the opportunity to pursue his ambition. Carl maintains a strong commitment to Jewish ethics and morals, values that have given him strength and survived with him through his life. This love for Judaism he has imparted to his 3 children. Along with religion, Carl believes the greatest gift he can give his children is an American education, and all 3 have pursued college degrees. Not only has Carl's success come through business, but through his family. At the close of the war, Carl was the only surviving member of his family. But now, in the United States, the name Rosenberg may be carried on for generations to come. Back here on 72nd Street at Carl's Tailor Shop, it's business as usual, much as it's been since Carl first opened his shop in 1950. Carl shares with other Holocaust survivors now in America dark memories of a not-so-distant past and the obligation to remind others never to forget. He also shares a love for the goodness of America and what America stands for. A country that gave him life, freedom, opportunity, and for many survivors like Carl Rosenberg, America brought success.
I hope that God shall bless America for generations to come to live in peace.